G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and joining me today is Tom from Mournival. How are you, Tom?
G'day, Mac. I'm good. How you doing?
Yeah, great. We've just been chatting a little bit off air about new stuff that's come out. But anyway, I invited you on the show because I thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk about Mournival stuff. We get a lot of listeners write into us on the videos and say, hey, what's with the Mournival events? Do you guys follow it at all? And of course we do. And we play a few of your rules, and people ask me, oh, Macca, have you tried their rules? Do you like them? And yes, is the answer to that. To the point where you and I argued at Active Heresy at the start of the year because I
Yep.
thought a rule wouldn't work out. And I think to my credit, I said, you know what, I'm going to try it. I actually tried it, and then I turned around to you and said, hey, you know what? That rule worked.
Yes, I do recall that, Macca, and good on you for giving it a go. Should be able to test our ideas rigorously, shouldn't we? And then we'll be able to judge their true strengths and their merits.
Exactly. So, why don't you tell the listeners a bit about yourself and the Mournival crew and what you guys do?
Okay, so we're in Sydney predominantly, although people come and go. But the core group has always existed in Sydney. I guess we met primarily through the Eye of Horus podcast. So listening to those guys and then getting onto their Facebook groups and then their chats and coming together as a group of like-minded individuals here in Sydney. We were attending other people's events, but we were really drawn in by the idea of Centurion that the Eye of Horus were pushing. So that sort of became a key concept for us. And we took that and ran with it and started running our own events back in 2018? No, 2016. Wow, that's a long time ago. Right at the end, yeah, November 2016 was the first time we ran an event. Using this idea of more infantry-based combats, I guess, was the thing. And terrain was also a big thing, pushing the idea of very narrative-driven themed terrain rather than just a hodgepodge of whatever the local game store had to chuck on the table to try and get a more immersive experience.
Why were
So that's
infantry heavy games something that you really wanted to implement in your particular area?
it's just the vibe really seemed to resonate with the core group of dudes that started this off. And that was based on the imagery, I think, of a lot of those Horus Heresy novels where there's just seas of men, just huge tides of space marines grinding against each other. A lot of the most famous battles are very infantry centric type ones at the time. Obviously, as the lore expanded and the books went on to cover different war zones, we got a lot more, especially now, Titan type battles, Titan battles, battles that involved a lot of super heavies or flyers, things like that. But in the early days, probably as a reflection of what Forge World was producing back in those very earliest times, 2012, when they just come out with the different Legion armors, the Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, Mark VI, Mark V armors. I think they had a bit more of an infantry focus as well, even though Forge World, I know historically before that, had been much more about tanks, all the different Imperial Guard variants of the tanks and the resin upgrade kits and the actual full resin tank kits. So that just seemed to resonate with us, Macca, the infantry focus. So that's what we ran with.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the infantry focus is the better way to tell the narrative during gameplay. It's not that I don't like the big battles. In fact, I love a good 3,000 point battle. But you sort of tip over that funny point where your infantry go from being the core driving force of your army and what you're doing in the tabletop to being something you remove in squads of 20 because a super heavy came along and wasted 3 weeks worth of painting in one turn of shooting.
Yeah, definitely. Once you get up to those like 2,500, 3,000 point games, the infantry do seem like a bit of a an adjunct to the main event, which is super heavies shooting huge laser beams into each other, things like that.
Yeah, which is kind of disappointing if you've sunk a lot of time and effort and work into building those miniatures and painting those miniatures. It's very depressing to do the old General Melchard from Blackadder and just start sweeping them off the table with a little dustpan and brush. So yeah, I definitely feel the same way. So
Also, I think it could also be because the Eye of Horus guys were really into like role playing type elements as well. So they had named characters that were engaging in sort of role playing mission type arcs within their stories, like shutting down warp portals and kidnapping people and um, having to get from point A to point B or go and grab a guy and make a deal with him or whatever. Things that don't really jive well with tank versus tank type battles, where it's more a tactical simulation or just a war game, basically.
well, it's funny because I think we might have met for the first time in person at Geigenhive, I think,
Yeah,
and that was very much sort of the forerunner of all of this because Act of Heresy existed, but I think we were only up to Act One at that point in history.
yeah,
And Geigenhive was very much a testing of new concepts of, hey, introducing bulk NPCs onto the tables, and then a whole bunch of stuff that's happening that I guess we'll call them the DMs,
yeah, yeah.
looking after
That's
on the
exactly what
side,
they were.
where they're going, okay, if this particular chain of events occurs on this table, it will lead to this new chain of events. They actually have like sheets written up with information on them, and they also made up stuff on the fly. Nobody expected Cat to throw a librarian, a navigator through a warp rift deliberately. Uh, they thought, oh, warp rift will naturally say to players, stay away from this thing, and we'll have demons come out of it. And then Cat walked up with a Terminator, picked up this navigator, and just threw him through the portal and said, now what? And the DMs had to go, well, fuck. So yeah, there's a lot of fun that came from that.
Yeah, it's a different mindset to what I think a lot of people up to that time, certainly myself, had experienced as narrative. As in, narrative was often just driven by the mission, so you have a bit of a background story and then you just play out a conventional game, or there is already an overarching story and then the events just seek to play out as a part of that rather than actually, as you just said, drive the actual changes in the story. Like what happens in the game will then lead to different things occurring rather than already knowing, oh, okay, so System X has been invaded and you're going to fight a whole lot of battles and at the end there's going to be one person that wins. But now it's no longer about just the system being invaded. Now it's about, yeah, there's warp portals here, you can open, you can shut them, demons could come in, characters could escape with this, you might have to chase them down. All sorts of much more player-driven content for the actual threads of the story.
And on top of that, we've also got interlocking campaigns. So here in Australia, we could have campaigns that take place all over the country and actually tie into one another, which is pretty neat as well.
Yeah, yeah, Andrew Hollis done a good job with that, getting everyone together. Obviously, this year with COVID, that's really killed most of that, unfortunately. But prior to this year, yeah, absolutely. Good to know that there's different groups of gamers and their games can add to this whole thread, this tapestry of the story that's being woven.
Truly a beautiful sight. Okay, so you guys decided to write down these rules for the Mournival events, and some of the things you've done have diverged somewhat from the original template, but the idea wasn't so much to diverge and create your own thing as to supplement the existing material, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So the existing red books from Forge World still are the core, definitely. And also the original Eye of Horus Centurion rules were a real keystone in the development of all this stuff. But I think more of our stuff is a bit of an expansion and a refinement in a lot of areas. So when we started playing, we were just doing Zone Mortalis and Centurion games, and Centurion from the Eye of Horus guys was a little bit loosey-goosey in terms of the non-infantry choices that you could take as many walkers or speeders as you wanted. So the first thing we experimented with was trying to limit those numbers down to really keep the infantry focus. And eventually we settled on the system of having, and this is on page 7 of the book, the Mournival Centurion rules of restricted units, where you could only have a certain number of them. And then restricted units above a certain points level, because Leviathans and things like that can be pretty nasty if you've got a Leviathan up against just, say, 3 infantry squads and a heavy bolter rapier, it's not going to work too well. And then unavailable ones, which are the largest things, the tanks, flyers, things like that are not used in Centurion games at all. So the key change, I guess, was to reduce the number of non-infantry units in terms of walkers and skimmers, keep them down a little bit by having 1 per 500 points. Or 1 unit per 500 points.
I myself expressed my concerns with the original Centurion rules, which, to be fair, Tim basically came up with them off the cuff. The idea of infantry and dreadnoughts.
I think he was just looking back at like 2nd and 3rd edition pictures where there was like, 2 Blood Angels tactical squads, Blood Angel character, and then you'd have a Blood Angel dreadnought and a Blood Angel, one of the old chunky metal dreadsock dreadnoughts, and a land speeder, one of the old full metal land speeders.
That's right, and I think the idea was great in theory, and then of course people, I don't know that abused it is the right way to say it, but they would take, people want to play their Leviathans and such because they're like, oh, this is a really big, cool looking model. I painted it up, and it's pretty decent in game, especially in these smaller games. So they just sort of take it, and they don't realize the consequences of their actions. So sometimes it's important to say to them, hey, maybe, just maybe, we should limit that stuff just a smidge. Which is obviously what your Mournival Centurion rules does. You've taken the original Eye of Horus concept and then refined it a little bit further and said, okay, these are some of the things we're going to have to look out for because they're more prone to misuse, deliberate or indeliberately.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Mac. I think most of the time people aren't consciously trying to come up with like, oh, this is going to be the OPest, wackest list ever, and I'm just going to crush everyone. It's, as you say, people have got a new big cool toy. Like when the Leviathan came out, everyone's like, whoa, that's awesome. Great aesthetics, good rules, probably appropriately costed, but just when you thrust it into the really lower points, it's just a little bit too much. Like, yeah, you could lose it first turn if someone's brought along laser destroyers and take it out, in which case you're at a massive disadvantage, or you can't kill it, in which case it just crushes everything, and yeah, it makes for a less fun experience for all the players concerned. So I don't think it was from a bad mindset, a competitive mindset, that people were using this stuff, but a bit of guidance is always good.
I think it goes from being going from rock, paper, scissors, unit versus unit, to rock, paper, scissors, army versus army was the problem. Where a particular unit could completely turn the course of the entire battle, as opposed to each individual unit having its own hard counters, which is the way I've always sort of traditionally built my armies, is that everything I try and do one job really well and try and take the slack of another unit, so if that other unit dies, it can at least, I've got some of that capability left over. And what would happen in the original Centurion rules is people would bring along a unit like a Leviathan Dreadnought, again, just to use the example, and if it had like Gravflux Bombard or something, it would come in and someone would spend all these points on like a Las Cannon Devastator squad, which in theory could kill it, and the whole squad would just be annihilated in a Gravflux volley. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, I guess he now has nothing that can hurt the Leviathan, and throw in the towel.
Yeah, it's not just Leviathans. Could have been like 9 Cordis, Contemptor Corduses, or just heaps of Javelins, Jav Swarms, things like that.
Yep. Multiple, say, Thanatars is a great example, because being Toughness 8 in a Strength 4 meta, it's pretty much impervious to harm, so it will rely on a lot of those like big heavy weapons, and of course it's firing a weapon which can kill most of the units it's going to face in the game. So yeah, it's not that it's bad to take these units initially, it's just there was scope for misuse, and usually I'll say I think it was indeliberate. People looking at their shelf when they're building their lists and they're like, oh, I got my tactical squads, got my breaches, oh yeah, I'll take some of those, and then they see the Dreadnought and they're like, huh, why not? It's like Bilbo with the One Ring, why shouldn't I keep it?
Yep, so tempting.
Yeah. So yeah, the Mournival rules. I've got it on screen at the moment, showing the Mournival
Mhm.
Centurion stuff. But there's also you've got additional rights of war in here. So why don't you take us through some of these rights of war, such as Legion Headquarters Company, the Legion Tactical Company, and explain your thinking behind those and why you wrote them.
So originally, if you just flip back a few pages, Mac, you'll see there's back 2 pages of the Legion at War diagram. So Dom Santilli, he's on Instagram as the Whisperheads. Go and check him out. He was a real core founding member of our Mournival events here in Sydney. He and I were tossing some ideas around as to how to structure the stuff to reduce the number of Leviathans and Thanatars and whatnot, and to pump up the number of actual infantry. So originally, an idea we came up was this Legion at War type structure where you might have to fill things out, but it turned out to be a little bit complex in practice to try and apply, especially with things like militia armies and then Sisters and Castos and Mechanicum, Solar Auxiliary, etc. So that's why we ended up going with the 1 per 500 rule. But if you look back at this sort of came from Book 1, Betrayal, the Principia Bellicosa, I think it's called,
Yep, the way the
or that
Legiones
diagram.
Astartes are laid out for their
Yeah.
doctrine.
Yeah, and it makes reference in those earlier black books to whole tactical companies, breacher companies, and whatnot. Plus, obviously, from the way that the army lists were written by Forge World, where you could have breachers as compulsory troops, assault marines as compulsory troops, and tacticals as compulsory troops. It seemed pretty heavily to suggest that you could then go on to form companies out of these things when used in conjunction with that betrayal diagram. So we thought, well, why not make them like rights of war, have some little bonuses that reinforce the benefits of taking these core troop types, and maybe put some restrictions on as well, just to reflect the actual structures that would have existed at the end of the Great Crusade. Our first lot of campaigns that we ran that were fully open for anyone to attend were Istvan 3. So that sort of informed our thinking. That was our focus. The very end of the Great Crusade and the very start of the heresy. That was always a particular interest of mine and Dom's, and he made up a heap of terrain for that and mentored me in making terrain as well. So then we were able to actually run the events. Without him doing that stuff early on, we probably would have never got off the ground. We would have just kept playing at game stores, and this would have just been a sort of a house rule idea used between friends. But it became the formalised system for our events. So, to get back to your question, Legion Headquarters Company, that's obviously, as the name suggests, some sort of group with the headquarters unit in it. So the way that we came up with the rules for these ideas was in I have Horace Mournival chats. We'd just chuck the ideas around. People would go away and try them out in some games. A lot of informal gaming going on. A bit of play testing there. Then put the ideas out to the group. The players here in Sydney, it was primarily at the time, see what they had to say on it. Everyone seemed pretty open to these ideas because already, if people were prepared to engage with Centurion, they're already in the mind space of, yes, house ruling stuff is cool. Yeah, we can make pluses and minuses to different rules. A bit of a restriction to add to the theme. Everyone's happy with these ideas. So these rights of war just continue that whole frame of thinking. So you get benefits to the banners, which is, you would imagine, what the effect of the aura of command emanating out from these elite officers that are leading the groups. Any infantry unit can be equipped with a Nuncio Vox for plus 10 points, so increased communications. And that Nuncio Vox allows units to benefit from the Cognoscignum that's carried by the Master of Signals, who is a compulsory part of this formation. And you could actually have a Terminator command squad and a Terminator Centurion or Delegatus leading the squad. And the other character that needs to round out the compulsory group is a Herald with a banner. So you actually end up with 2 banners. You've got the Herald's banner and you've got the Command Squad's banner, or Legion banner as it's called. So you end up with all 3 of your headquarters choices used, plus the Command Squad counts as part of that headquarters as well. And then from there, obviously, you can fill out the troops with whatever you want, because the headquarters is just the command elements. So you could have the headquarters of a breacher company, you could have the headquarters of a Terminator company, you could have the headquarters of a tactical company, whatever. Few options also for Legion specific command type units, so suzerains or Templar Brethrens could be selected in place of the command squad. And if you went with a Terminator option instead, then you could take the Phoenix Terminators, Gorgons, Deathshroud, Justarin, or Fire Drakes, because they're the command type Terminators of their respective legions. And obviously, a restriction that we put in place was cannot be used with a Shattered Legion army, because Shattered Legions wouldn't have such gloriously intact headquarters units. In fact, you would have had to have, if you're going to run, say, 3 different units, you would have had to have a Centurion from one legion, a Herald from a different legion, and a Master of Signals from another legion, which didn't seem particularly coherent. So
not to mention they're all being inspired by the same banner, and I don't think that necessarily the Raven Guard banner is going to inspire the Iron Hands as much.
So true. So hopefully the restrictions there force people to build in a certain way that reflects the actual structure, and then you get the benefits from that structure. Same again with the Legion Tactical Company. This is really the bread and butter, one would think, of the late Great Crusade, early Heresy formations. And the thing about tacticals, everyone would know, is the Fury of the Legion. So how do we lean into that? So we had a rule where you can use Fury of the Legion for anybody with a bolt gun. So this is mainly aimed at like veteran squads, but I guess it would apply to Seekers as well. And so we had to put in a little rule, note that special ammunition or combi weapon parts can't be used with Fury of the Legion. So you can't Fury the melter part of your combi melter, or the plasma part of your combi plasma, or your Scorpius rounds from your Seekers. And a bonus is that it can be used every turn, and you don't need the minimum 5 number of models. But you're still going to be stationary, so it still imposes that static hold the line view. So the tacticals are camped, they've got a heap of ammo stored up, ammo servitors, boxes, crates, whatever, and they're ready to let rip. And then the heavy support squads, if you go back to the Principia Bellicosa diagram, there should be like 2 big tactical squads, a tactical support squad, and then a heavy support squad. So we said suspensor webs would be a good idea for the heavy support squad, just so they could advance with the tactical support and the tactical squads. So there's the option for those things for Iron Havocs, who are like a heavy support type squad, and also just straight out Legion heavy support squads, get them for free. And lastly, the heavy support squads gain Implacable Advance to simulate the ability of the infantry to take and hold ground. However, you do need to fill out basically the guts of that Principia Bellicosa diagram. So you need 2 tactical squads and you need a tactical support squad. You can or you cannot take a heavy support squad. There's obviously a pretty good benefit if you do, because you can then take those suspensor webs. So that's using up a pretty big chunk of points. Like you'd be looking at an easy 600, 800 points just for that stuff, plus your character. So it's really reinforcing that idea of lots of boots on the ground.
Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. And not just that, to take a step back to the Legion Headquarters Company, these rules were written prior to Book 9. You could, for instance, none of this is really set in stone. If you talk to someone you're playing or to your TO at an event, they might turn around and allow exceptions to these rights of war. So one of the things might be where you've got the option to take a Suzerain or a Templar Brethren squad with your Herald, you might be able to add, say, Deathwing Companions in as an option, and Contakar Terminators as an option for some of the units that might be able to be taken with them. You can think a bit outside the box here, I think, is what you're encouraging people to do with these rules. If they turn around to you, like you guys might FAQ it after this and say, Deathwing Companions can be taken with the Herald, even though they're normally taken with the Praetorian and Dark Angel's army. The Right of War's making an exemption for them.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Mark. This original rule book was written before book 8 and 9, I think. So, there's some things that need to be added in for the later legions, for sure. And I do try and do that when I get time and when I get the information, like you've just given me there. Some great info about the Contakar. Hadn't thought of them. But once that's pointed out at some stage, in my free time, because I don't do this as a job, I'll add it to the FAQ, and then every 3 months or so we release the FAQ dealing with any issues that come up, because we can't think of every combination, and in playtesting, not every vagary of opponents and rules interactions occurs, and then we get the odd question, which are really good, usually through my Facebook, through Mournival events or through my Facebook Messenger. I get a steady stream of questions from people about the various things and interactions, and a lot of them are covered in FAQs, but there's always fresh stuff coming, especially with a new book. So it's a good point, Macca. It's a great point. This is all by opponent consent anyway, so think outside the box, ask your opponent. Absolutely.
That's right. And if you're playing at home or you're playing among friends, experiment. It's your game too. It's there to be enjoyed. You don't need to completely rigidly hold yourself to the rules. Me personally, my Solar Ogs army, I'm never going to run all the Melkador chassis in it as not super heavies, because to me the Melkador needs to be a super heavy to be a viable tank with the way their war gear works on them. So that experimental rule that Forge put out to me was poorly thought out. I would instead suggest some sort of, you know, lighter super heavy rules perhaps for them, so they don't have D-sized explosions when they die and such, if that was the primary concern. But you can't have a vehicle that's armed with a battle cannon and a demolisher cannon, and it's either one or the other that you fire on it. It defeats the point of having that vehicle.
Yeah, for sure. And I think 30k players are pretty good at this, Macca, too, right? Because being more narrative focused, I think, than a lot of other war games, the rules are, as you say, a vehicle to have fun and to tell your story. They're not something that you got to like autistically stick to only the printed materials and nothing else. And if anyone tries anything else, they're trying to cheat you and they're trying to rip you off, and you can't stand for it. That's not the mindset that the players have.
Especially if people are willing to pay points, or what if people are really good in this community of making workarounds? So one of my workarounds to my Thousand Suns was I'd often say to people, hey, I want to run a command squad in my Thousand Suns, which is already a pretty rare thing. I think I should be able to make them psychers for the same cost as it is for Legion Terminators and Legion Veterans, because aren't command squad members meant to be the most elite members of said Legion?
That makes perfect sense, Macca. And if you ask me that, I'd say 100% go for it, mate.
And that's exactly what most people say. Also, even prior to the Thousand Suns getting their rules, I would say to people, hey, can I run librarians as compulsory HQs? And most people would be like, yeah, that makes sense. They're Thousand Suns. It didn't break the game to have 3 level 2 librarians on the tabletop with Thousand Suns. Especially when there was no Legion rules out, people were like, you know what? Here, have a bone.
Yeah, it's super creamy. It's great.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of things that people could apply that to within the heresy as well. If they came up with appropriate reasons and justifications for why they might want to do something, I think you'd find the community is very open to it. It could be little things like taking storm shields as an upgrade or something to Templar Brethren might be something people might allow under certain circumstances. But you'd have to justify it and say, here's why I want to do it, here's how I think it works, and here's the limitation I'm going to impose upon myself for taking this better upgrade on the unit.
Yeah.
So anyway, moving on, Decurian Mode. What's the deal with Decurian Mode for people who have no idea what it is?
So in Book 3, Extermination, there was a system of rules made by Alan Bligh called Tactical Strike, which was about little task forces of about probably 15 to 20 models for a Marine force. I think the rules were mainly aimed at, and the models actually activated as individuals rather than as parts of units. So it's sort of like a forerunner of Kill Team, but using the 7th engine, or 7th edition engine, instead of the 8th edition with the keywords and all that sort of stuff. So there was a campaign called Victory is Vengeance set on Istvan 5, and it was basically about how after the drop site massacre there were little shattered groups of Raven Guard, Salamanders and Iron Hands around the periphery of the Urgal Depression, maybe up in the hills, being hunted by the remnants of the traitors that were left behind. So there was the big celebration, the huge pyres, the big tower built, Horus declared his rebellion, everyone cheered him, and then all the elite units, all the front line, all the main legionary assets disappeared off Istvan 5 off to prosecute the long war, the March to Terror, and they left behind, it was a sort of a pseudo-cull, I guess you could say, all the less desirable elements of those traitor legions to hunt down and finish off the loyalists. So it was these little skirmishy type battles where there was a whole campaign was reasonably involved, and it was interesting because book one and book two were more about the bigger battles with the super heavies, and then book three was about these smaller type battles that also had Zone Mortalis in it. Book three, and it was an unfortunate combo in one way, in that to get players into the heresy, because at this time 40k and 30k still were the same rule set, it would have been probably a little bit more efficient if it had been the other way around, and the Zone Mortalis and these tactical strike games had come out first, and then players could have been lured in to just, paint up 10, 20 models, paint up a little 1,000 point Zone Mortalis game, have a game, see how awesome it is, see how deep the narrative is, see how huge the backstory and the fluff, and how completely immersive, painting up all the heraldry and making up little stories for your squads and their locations in the heresy, their actions, who they were betrayed by, who they're going to betray. I think it would have been a slightly better way to go around it, but I understand, just because of the nature of the story, that wasn't really possible. But I do think once book three came out, that there were quite a number of players that were brought in through using these smaller type battles, and then obviously with the plastic box sets that came out for Calth and Prospera, it boomed. That was the boom times, and now we don't have a plastic starter kit anymore. Not so good. Hopefully Games Workshop does something about that at some stage.
Hashtag bring back Calth.
Yeah, Calth, or a Mark II box even, that'd be great. Like, how good would Mark II be?
So good. People would kill for Mark II box. All the time I get comments on the live streams, people saying, oh, do you think they're going to do Mark II in plastic? And sadly, I have to keep saying, I don't think so. It's not the Games Workshop that I know.
Lost opportunity. So, the Victory's Vengeance system was really good, but a little bit complex, we thought, for beginners, because a lot of the focus that we thought we could use these smaller games for was to lure new players in and expand the Mournival event gang, and it worked quite well. We ran a couple of Decurian events, and we did get lots of new players come along, and some of them stuck around, which was good. Some of them have obviously faded away and gone off to 8th or other systems or stopped playing or whatever, but it was a good growth time in the hobby, and Decurian is trying to capture a simplified version of the 30k rule set.
It would be really good to see the Decurian evolve into a full-on 40k kill team. I'm obviously, as people would be aware, not a huge fan of the 8th edition rule set, as an understatement. But it would be really...
It doesn't interest me either.
No, the lack of tactical depth was always my biggest concern, as opposed to changing up how weapon skill and wounding and stuff worked. That stuff I could live with. It was the loss of the tactical depth. But anyway, the Decurian mode to me is that great basis, and part of me wants to see a full-on kill team realization with the current kill team rule set essentially translated over to 30k, so that people could dip their feet into rules that they know coming from 8th and 9th edition, and then go, okay, what's this other rule set that's used in the heresy, and then go from kill team into Decurian, and then hopefully from Decurian into full-on and Centurion and Age of Darkness battles.
Yeah, it's a great point. Now that they don't have the same core engine, 30k and 40k, it is a bit harder to get 30k players, I think, because in the old days, everybody played both, right? And the 40k players just drifted over time into 30k, and now you don't get that steady flow.
Yeah, well, it's been how many years now? 4? I say 3 or 4 since they swapped to 8th edition. Yeah. And obviously, people are starting to forget. They're starting to forget what 7th edition was, what 6th edition was, 5th edition's well and truly ancient history as far as they're concerned, whereas for myself and probably yourself, 5th edition is sort of the midpoint of our hobby careers. And
yes, indeed.
And we're like relics, Indiana Jones style. They got to go up and put the little bag of sand on the pillar and grab the codex off the thing, and the fucking temple comes crashing down. So part of me was like, it'd be really nice to see kill team, but for 30k, and with 3 Thalax on one side or something could be a viable kill team. and 5 Astartes on the other with their Legion specific rules. Could be another valid kill team. And then they might go from there, as I say, to Decurion and go, all right, now I'm going to use 20 models. And then from Decurion up to Centurion. And before they'll know it, they'll have an army. And that'd be great.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you've got a Zone Mortalis force, you just need to add like a unit of land speeders or something to make a Centurion army, and then you just add a heap of tanks, and you've got a full 3,000 point army. Like once you've got that core of infantry, it's not that much of a jump. It probably is cash wise if you're going to buy the genuine Forge World kits, but in terms of how much more you have to paint and how long you have to spend, it's not such a huge investment to get from the start all the way to being a fully fledged Heresy player.
Slow grow was always something I was a huge fan of. When I was living in Sydney, I ran a slow grow league over the year. And what I did was I said, okay, your core army to start out with was one troops choice. And so it was the goal of the month would be to paint a troops choice. Then the next month would be another troops choice. And then the third month was a HQ. And by doing that, there were people who had never painted a full 40k army, but by setting a really realistic goal for them over that span of time with the Slow Grow League, each month it was just paint one unit, guys. Just paint this unit this month. And it was up to them what troops choice, what tank, what HQ they painted. And by the time 6 months had gone by, all of a sudden they were playing 1,000 point games. And they're like, holy crap, I've painted a full 1,000 points. I've never painted an army in my life, and all of a sudden I've got a full army. And it's the same sort of more mentality with Zone Mortalis and Horus Heresy. If you go out, and I always say to people in getting started, they're like, oh, what should I start my army with? And I go, get 2 tactical squads, a HQ, a Contemptor Dreadnought, and then add in a toy of some kind. A tank, a specialist Terminator unit for your Legion, perhaps, something like that, as your sort of like your capping stone. Where I think people go wrong.
To give some Legion flavour, like if you're White Scars, you might add a unit of jet bikes or
Exactly,
Night Raptors,
exactly.
Night Lords.
Where I think people go wrong is they set themselves too big a starting goal initially, and they make their project overly daunting. So you go, you know what? I'm going to collect Death Guard, and they go out, and the first thing they buy is a Typhon siege tank, and then they start working on this super heavy tank, and they get through the tank, and at the end of it, they're like, oh man, that was a lot of work. I don't know that I want to paint these 40 tactical marines that are now just sitting here. It's like start with the tactical marines and just do it. I want to paint 10 models this month or 10 models over a fortnight. And then the next fortnight, I'm going to paint another 10 models. And then you throw something like a HQ in there to mix it up a bit as a bit of a reward to yourself. Okay, here's a character I can go to town on it a little bit, do some more decals, some fancy conversion work, and then you can go and take the next step from there and add something else to the army. Where people go wrong, as I say, I'll repeat it again, is they take too much on at once. They take a big super heavy tank or a Titan or something ridiculous, Knight Periphon, and then they start that for their army, and then they just lose all enthusiasm because they gave themselves a project that's taken them like 3 months to complete.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Maka. Totally agree. Slow grow, definitely a good way. And, the internet's pretty good for that. There's all sorts of different painting communities and hobby communities that can do those sorts of things. Excuse me. I myself go in the Age of Darkness podcast hobby challenge every fortnight, and I find that's pretty good. Fortnight is usually a pretty tight sort of goal, so it keeps you focused.
Yeah, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Also, other game systems, not just 30k and 28mm scale, but even Adeptus Titanicus. If you start out with Titanicus and you buy a box set, it's like, okay, start the Knights. Then maybe do your Warhounds, and then your Reavers, then your Warlord, and holy crap, you've done a full Titan maniple.
Yeah, you can whip a Warhound up pretty easily, to be honest. Obviously, how long's a piece of string? You can keep adding details and weathering and whatever, but the actual number of parts to the Warhound is not huge compared to the later kits. So if you cut your teeth on a couple of Warhounds, yeah, you've got a nice little force to begin with. They're interesting Titans to use. and then you build from there. The Reavers, yeah, and the Warbringers and the Warlords, much bigger kits, a lot more effort and time. But by that stage, you've already got a reasonably chunky force, and this is just like the big next keystone type centerpiece.
Plus, the often overlooked thing is your skills are developing and improving as you go. You're not throwing yourself into the deep end of a Warlord Titan, which is a lot of work compared to a Warhound. And so that Warhound it's like your Rocky Balboa training montage. That is your practice. So you do that Warhound, you do the second Warhound, you do your Reaver, maybe a second Reaver. By the time you get to that Warlord, you know what's going on. You know how to paint your Titans by that point. I think it's the same with 30k in general. Once you've painted an army, by the time you get to the end of painting that army, you've gotten a lot better at painting the army, and it's kind of disappointing in a way because you want to go back now and start fixing up all the little imperfections in the first units. You know, it's a hobby. It's a growing process, and over time, you're going to get better at it and improve at it. So,
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely been the case with my Titanicus. I'm on Instagram as Heresy Enthusiast if you want to check me out. And if you look back at my earlier Warhounds a couple of years ago, yeah, not so amazing. And then my more recent stuff, I think I've developed a lot more skills and uses of weathering and the different airbrushing techniques and the decals and putting in all the little details. So 100% right, Macca. You're 100% right.
and I don't want to discourage people either, but by the same token, if you have a very big, expensive, fancy model like a Primarch, don't if you know you can't paint it, don't paint it yet. I'm not saying that you shouldn't attempt it, but if you know that perhaps you're not ready for the challenge, practice a little bit first before you actually put, paint to model, and try and work on those skills because you're paying a lot of money for an expensive, very fancy model. You're going to be pissed with yourself if you do it in injustice. So there's also additional benefits for taking your time and doing the smaller projects first and really making it the cornerstone, the key capping piece really actually of the force, as opposed to trying to start out with those units. I think it could be said.
Yeah, there's nothing more discouraging than getting a model and getting all fired up and painting it, and then at the end you're not happy with it. You don't think it looks as good as it should look, and you're like, oh, why would I bother doing any more? Whereas if you say, as you say, start with your tacticals, they're a bit more simple, get your skills up, do more and more units, and then you get to the Primarch, do a nice job, feel happy with yourself. Very motivational to go on to further projects.
Exactly. All right, so that's Decurion in a nutshell, the idea behind it. So you've also added things like there's the Armory of the Age of Darkness. So you have additional ammunition types, exotic melee weapons. What was some of the thinking that went along here?
So the ammunition was primarily to give a bit of a boost, mainly to tacticals, but a lot of the ammo can also be taken by other units such as breaches or seekers might be able to get some of these things. The odd unit can use it in their bolt pistols. So again, just reinforcing the infantry focus and especially the tactical squad focus, because we felt that really was the core sorts of units. The Heresy is primarily about Space Marines. I know there's some locations where there's lots of Mechanicum players or lots of militia players, and I think over in the UK they even held an all-militia event, which is really good, or all solar and militia, which is really good. But definitely here in Sydney, most people run Space Marines either as at least at the primary or as an allied detachment, and lots of people have multiple Legion forces. So I've got Sons of Horus, Night Lords, White Scars, Raven Guard, Alpha Legion, myself, Ed Annihilator on Instagram. Check him out. He's done Raven Guard. He started with them, then he went on and he did Space Wolves, and now he's also doing Night Lords, amazing Night Lords, but also he's got Custodies. So lots of players, lots of different legions, but very Marine centric. So Marine centric is all about the bolt gun, and what's better than bolt guns that shoot stuff that works better. So all these rounds increase the efficiencies of the units. I did the mathematics behind it. They're all increase the average firepower by about 16%. And if they're a little bit above that, then the ammunition costs a little bit more. If they're a bit below that, the ammunition costs a bit less, but off a basis of about plus 10 points per squad. Obviously, some of it's a bit situational. If you read through, for instance, the Night Lord's Kraken light bolts, they're AP4, which is not going to help you at all against power armor, but against solar auxilia and militia, beautiful. So you send, if there's some sort of campaign you're running or some sort of event where there's multiple players and they can be allocated to different areas, you send the Night Lords to hunt down the militia, to hunt the humans. They don't want a fair fight. The Night Lords want to go and pick on the weaker, and they've got just the right tools for it. So it reinforces that narrative type aspect. Salamanders, Pyre bolts, you shoot bolts into people, you want them to burst into flames, right? Salamanders are all about flames, so they've got deflagrate. So the bolt hits, if it makes it inside the human, the post-human, the flammable liquids or the super space magics, whatever they are, explode, flames come out, has a similar effect to a Volkite weapon. Bits of flaming space marine go flying around and could injure their their friends that are with them.
It's a situational benefit that you're paying a points increase for, as opposed to a flat benefit, which is what I think a lot of people have to understand. Because, for instance, gaining that deflagrate rule does not turn tactical marines into a tactical support squad armed with Volkites, because you haven't got the strength bonus on the weapons. It's not just a flat buff. The Night Lords is a great example, as you said, because that's the one I was gravitating towards, where it's okay, that's going to be really strong against those particular factions, but only against the infantry in those factions, and only if you happen to play those particular factions. So that's the trade-off. You're paying these points for that situational benefit, as opposed to something like the old acid rounds that the Dark Angels used to have, where it was just, oh, this is just better in every conceivable way. Yeah, so that I quite like. So what about some of these exotic melee weapons? Explain those.
Melee weapons. There's a lot of Necromunda type talk that goes on amongst the Mournival chats, and Josh Hindle's right into it. So he came up with most of these. These are his brainchilds. Go and check him out on Instagram. He's Shattershell. Posts a lot of Kroot boys. If you're into Kroot, probably already following him. And cool, mysterious, lensed and robed figures. So he came up with the fluff and the names and the rules for all these weapons, and then I sort of tried to balance them out a little bit so if they weren't quite on par with each other, just so that you can just do a straight exchange power fist for one of them, so they're all worth about 20 points-ish. And again, it's for a Centurion meta, so there's not much AP2. If it is, it might be not as good as the traditional source of AP2 in Marine lists, which is, of course, the Paragon Blade. So this is all tuned down a little bit, just for like 1,500 points or 2,000 point Centurion games. What's some good ones? Bioceramic Razor Glaive. Carved from the glittering shell of some unknown Xenos beast, this almost weightless blade can cut as well as the finest Imperial power weapons, but one careless blow too many can damage its keen edge. So it's got range nothing, obviously being a melee weapon, strength user, AP2, so it's got AP2, grants +1 initiative, so it's like the Duelist's Edge, is that what it's called?
Yes. Duelist Edge.
But it's got the downside brittle. So if a user of this weapon hits with all of their attacks during a single round of combat, the AP is reduced to nothing for the remainder of the battle. So if you hit too often, you're going to shatter the blade.
See, funny enough, one of the things that immediately jumps out to me about this list is that he has been 10 times more creative with the names than Forge World has been lately. Where, like, not to be a dick about it, but so Forge World, if Photonic, Darkfire, Archaeotech, they take a key set of words and they just repeat the same word and just throw some sort of prefix or suffix after that word to change it down. Like, it's not a Darkfire cannon, it's a Demi-Darkfire cannon. It's not a photon thruster, it's a photon thrust gauntlet. Whereas here, he's actually gone out of his way to create some very different words and use some actual archaic terms, such as a falchion. Instead of saying a non-fractal sword or non-fractal blade, he said a falchion which is a completely different type of, basically a big machete. Uh,
Yeah, his name's great. Gyrocyclic Reaver Blade. I love that one.
yeah, it sounds like a fucking death metal band. Gyrocyclic Reaver Blade. Ah!
Yeah, so they're all good. Check them out. I think they're all appropriately balanced, and people often take them in their Centurion lists and find that they're not as good as Paragon Blade, but that's good because you shouldn't have a Praetor in 1,500 points if you're playing at a Mournival event anyway. So these are nice alternate options.
Oh, definitely. You've also done additional psychic powers, but we won't go into those because psychic powers in general are a clusterfuck. It is nice to see them though. I don't really use them myself because even though I'm a Thousand Suns player, you're locked into having to use your cults.
Yeah, the thinking behind these ones, Macca, is they're mainly for use by the Rogue Psyker, who pops up a little bit later. So they're weird, different things from the 6th and 7th rule set that aren't at all like the traditional legionary core powers. I know they're core to all the different armies, but really only see librarians pretty much use these types of things.
Even then, I think psychers are quite a rare sight in general in the heresy. I'll say that as a Thousand Suns player, they're not common. It's just too much of a stuff around to use them, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. The rules are complex. The rewards are super variable. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're terrible. Can leave players with a little bit of a sour taste either way. So, yeah, probably need a rework from the ground up, and hopefully that'll happen at some stage. So after the psychics, we've got the agents and additional units. Agents was a big thing that also Oz 30k, Andrew Hollis, and the Active Heresy and Canberra guys use. So these add a lot of narrative flavour. Agents, probably most people would be familiar with from the agents options that exist already in the rules. So you've got the Navigator, is a very notable agent. You can add them to your force as a HQ choice, and they've got some nice little buffs like their Gaze of Death or their ability to only be shot at as Ballistic Skill 1.
Yep, you've also got the Knights Errant, of course, with Garrow and Tylus Rubio, and a generic Knight Errant, which are all agents of the Imperium.
Yeah, so they come with extra victory conditions and victory points, things like that. These agents, a lot of them come from the novels, inspired by the Black Books, so especially Nemesis, where there's the whole gang warband of assassins that head out to try and take out Horus, end up shooting the wrong guy in the head, spoiler alert. But also then there's the flip side of that, because the assassin houses loyalists, as the way they're presented in all the backstories, so we didn't think it would be appropriate to make them available to the traders, so instead there's, in some cases, there's a parallel. So, for instance, the Vindicare Assassin is the sniper one for the loyalists, and the Exodus model from the Alpha Legion range, he's the trader version of that.
What's your favourite of these traitor assassins? Which one of these would you pick? And maybe take us through it.
From the rule book, there's a slightly smaller list. In the battle manual, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, would be my actual favourite one. But I'd normally serve the War Master Horus. However, I think my favourite is probably one of the unusual assassins, and that would be the Vanus Assassin. So this guy is, I'll read his blurb. The Vanus Clade wages a far more complex war than that of other clades, working to engineer their mark's doom through a consummate command of information. Their modus operandi is to learn everything possible about not only their target, but also those closest to him, then to tacitly manipulate circumstances so that their mark's death is brought about by his own folly, or, preferably, by the hand of a once trusted friend or comrade. It is the Vanus Clade that is employed when the revelation of a prominent figure's thoughts and actions would cause more damage than the knowledge of any possible retribution that might be meted out to them. Many a vaunted figurehead has met with premature end after their darkest secrets have reached the ears of the Vanus. So the Vanus do not have high-level combat stats like the other assassins, but instead they've got a whole lot of different sneaky tricks. So they come with a Cogitator Gauntlet, which is basically Haywire type gauntlet, so you can attack some sort of armored target with it and infect it with viruses and disinformation. Got a Jin Scheme, which is basically like a Nuncio box, but you can also have sort of like a Cognos Signum attached to a Cyber Ocularis, which is the third bit of war gear that the Vanus has. They've got a Cyber Ocularis, and that's a little model, little servo skull type thing. Could be any sort of model really, a little techno spider or whatever, and it zooms around the battlefield, buffing units and doing sneaky tricks also. The Vanus doesn't actually need to be represented on the table, so if you don't like painting so much, the Vanus is a good option because you don't have to paint anything. You deploy the Cyber Ocularis instead. Now, the rules are there for the Vanus, so you could include him in narrative scenarios, or you could make him an NPC or an objective. Lots of different ways to have him interact, used by a DM to get up to all sorts of shenanigans. But the Cyber Ocularis are controlled remotely, so the Vanus presumably has all sorts of information feeds to be outside the battle space, but manipulating these Cyber Ocularis to go around. And the Cyber Ocularis are jetpack infantry, so they're quite fast moving. They can thrust around. They've got the Data Burst, which again is basically like a Cogitated Gauntlet sort of thing, in that it's a haywire attack, but it's got a bit of a range, so you can sneak around and shoot at vehicles and try and corrupt their systems. They've also got Stealth, because they're quite small and sneaky. Fearless, because they're they're just slaved automata or robots or little drones or whatever. Jink, so they can dodge things quickly. They can never score or contest because they're really not important tactically speaking. They've got a rule called Independent Operative, so they can just operate by themselves, never be joined by anything else. They confer the Interceptor rule on a friendly unit, so they're a nice little buff. The Vanus could have forewarning of some sort of reinforcements coming, or an interdiction force, so he sends out one of his Cyber Oculari and they can impart that information to the friendly troops. And they've also got a thing called Auger Sweep, so enemy units within 12 inches suffer -1 to cover save, so you can send a Cyber Ocularis out to like paint a target or designate their exact location if they're trying to secrete themselves. And that's about it really. Just sneaky tricks. Just really a pain in the ass for about 115 points. They sneak around. The Cyber Ocularis sneak around and just be a pain in the bum. So you can have 3, or you can upgrade to get 4 for plus 35 points.
The great thing about this is that it's thinking outside the box. It's not just putting another unit on the tabletop and going through the mishmash of special rules that are available. Instead, you've created a character who is essentially a drone pilot who's sitting off the table, and it's the drones themselves that he's sending into the battlefield, and they're pretty killable. Like, that's the other thing. It's not a Praetor, for instance, who's come on with like 3 wounds, toughness 4, 2+ save, and invulnerable. No, it's a little servo skull. Yeah, it can kind of jink around in that, but still only toughness 3 with 1 wound. Like, you can kill the things.
Yeah, very killable. Shoot a lasgun through it. Boom, it's gone.
Yeah, but you've got to take the time to devote that attention to killing them, or else they're just going to be a hindrance to your entire game effort, the entire length of the battle. So yeah, that's great stuff. So obviously you've got quite a comprehensive list here. Alpha Legion Sleeper Cells and Legion Gunnery Centurion, a whole bunch of different stuff here, and they're just additional flavors that you can add to armies. They're not something you have to take. They're not a must-have. There's no unit really that sticks out to me as being so ludicrously strong you'd want to take lots of it and focus your army around it. And I think the reason that is because of how you guys construct your rules. You often seem to put the rules out there to your community and then take the feedback on board and try and find that situation that works best. Recently there was one of those with the veteran Terminator squads where objectively they're better than Legion Terminators, and so the question is, okay, how can you have them be better than Legion Terminators and also make them fair to be played in a game with Legion Terminators and not just a must take over them? And so that's the balancing act you're doing, and part of the way you're able to do that so efficiently is by getting the community involved with their feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Mac. We definitely do try and encourage that. And as the group's grown, it's been good because then we get more and more opinions. And I get lots of PMs of people saying, "Oh, about this for an idea," and sometimes I sit on it for a while, and it takes time to pop up. So if you do send me an idea, don't think that it's been completely forgotten. It might not appear for a while, but it does. And all the feedback from people who are actually playing games and pointing out what works and what doesn't, what they think is too good, what's not good enough. It allows us to calibrate the stuff. I've got a bit of an algorithm that I use for marine type units that I run through that gives a base sort of level of the points cost, which obviously is a really useful moderating factor. If something's really good and it doesn't cost enough, then people will take lots of it probably. But if something costs too much, no one's going to take it. So you want it to be in the sweet spot of what I would say is balanced play. Because even though it's a narrative game, you don't want to disadvantage yourself. Well, I find that you don't want to deliberately. Some people will say, "Oh, yeah, just take whatever for whatever reason," and that's true of a minority. But I think most people are intelligent enough to say, "Well, yeah, that's not a great option." Classic example: Phalanx Warders, right? They used to be absolutely terrible. Imperial Fists, you'd see dudes with shields everywhere. What were they? They were breaches. You'd never see any Phalanx Warders. Anuj went through, fixed them up, changed the rules, made them heaps better for their costs. So, they still cost more than breaches, but now they're better than breaches. So there is a reason to take them, and now people are running Phalanx Warders, and it's great because it adds to the diversity of the game. When shit's unbalanced, it decreases the diversity of the game, which is not a good thing.
I think a key part of that is obviously there's a cut-off point where you say, okay, we've had enough feedback on this unit, we're going to lock it in where it is. There will never be perfect balance. It's very important to say to people. What you're trying to get is an approximation of a balance. And there will always be that example of a unit that's, it's perfectly fine, it's not broken, but then in a one very, very, very specific build, all of a sudden it becomes OP. My complaints about rules with something like Forge World puts out is when they put out something and it just blatantly you raise your eyebrow the second you look at it. And that's something you guys tend to avoid because, again, you're the way you're proofreading it and outsourcing it to the community. The example I'll use, it's a bit of a low blow here, but the Deathwing Companions that just came out, I believe it was, have the option of a Thunderhammer and a Power Fist. But the Power Fist, which is an objectively worse weapon than the Thunderhammer, costs 5 points as an upgrade and the Thunderhammer is free. And that's just one of those moments where you raise your eyebrow and go, so why would I ever take the Power Fist?
Yeah, it's a head scratcher, that one, Macca. I don't know.
It's just down to how they've proofread the material, basically. But that's the sort of thing that's avoided by having your more collaborative approach to the game. And as I said, it can't be 100% collaborative. You can't take every bit of feedback on everyone's personal idea. And you're not trying to be rude about it either by, there's a cutoff. Not everyone's idea works in every situation. And even if their ideas are good, if you've already got a unit that works great, you're not going to modify it to suit someone else's new ideas. Perhaps you might come up with a new unit down the line. I think it's important for people to understand that where their feedback is being listened to, but not necessarily implemented or acted upon due to other reasons that may be out there, not just because you're a jerk.
Yeah, definitely, Mac. No, you're 100% right, because that case study you gave before about the Legion Veteran Terminator Squad, perfect example. Like, I had one bit of feedback that said, which one was it? The Iron Hands Legion Veteran Terminators, so this is in the battle manual, not the rulebook, have feel no pain. And one bit of feedback I got was, oh, that's absolutely useless because they're always going to be coming up against other Terminators with Power Fists, so feel no pain does absolutely nothing. And then the other bit of feedback I got was, "Wow, that's so overpriced, overpowered, underpriced. Like, these guys have got 2 wounds and they've got feel no pain. Whoa." So obviously I can't do both. I can't address both of those concerns at the same time. But my personal opinion is, if you get that sort of feedback, maybe it means you're in the right spot, because in some circumstances it's good and in other circumstances it's bad, which maybe is the happy medium.
Yeah, that's probably how I would look at that situation. There's the trade-off there is going to be, okay, they're going to be really solid when they're not against Power Fist and they're not copying attacks that are double toughness. So shooting, shooting is going to be good. It means you're going to be very resilient to anything that's strength 8 or worse. But in close combat or facing against stuff that's strength 9 or higher, yeah, they're going to have difficulty. In which case, it's up to you as the person using the Terminators to avoid those situations.
Yeah, put them in the right spot to bully the units. As you were talking about before, Mackie, you got to plan for how you're going to use all the assets that you have and try and get the right matchup so your rock is attacking their paper, not their scissors.
Yeah, exactly. So,
oh, sorry, other way around. I said the wrong way around.
yeah, well, I knew what you meant. I think the audience did too. Especially the dyslexic people. For them, it was the right way around. So, yeah, obviously, I'm just showing off some of these Legion units in the background to people so they understand there's many of the units are taking the concepts of, say, breaches or tactical marines and saying, okay, there isn't. If you buy a breacher squad in the game, yeah, okay, they can take some las cutters or maybe some graviton guns. What you've done is say, hey, why don't we make a breach unit that's a tactical support squad, but with breacher shields? Because wouldn't that be a thing if you're breaching, enemy voidcraft? You'd want breaches that have more than just bolt guns. Because what happens if they run into dreadnoughts or something?
Yeah, it comes back to that Principia Bellicosa diagram. If you've got a tactical company that has a tactical squad, tactical support squad, well, why wouldn't you have a breacher company with breacher squad, breacher support squad?
Yeah, and what's stopping a tactical company from picking up bloody boarding shields from their armory wall? This is 30k. Marines are specialised in their roles, yes, but they're also adaptable in 30k. If you read the stories, they can drop the weapons they're using, pick up something else, and use that. And although it's very hard to represent that in game, perhaps you can do it in Decurian, but you can't do it in a 3,000 point game. You can't have tactical squads dropping their guns to pick up las cannons or something. It's a great way of showing, hey, maybe before the battle, this breacher squad threw their bolters down and picked up some plasma guns because they knew that, hey, we're going to need these.
Yeah, these are large organisations. They've got well-equipped armories at the end of the Great Crusade. There'd be no reason why there wouldn't be sufficient plasma guns or melter guns or whatever to outfit a squad with them. Same with the power weapons on the Legion Assault Support Squad.
Yep, another great example right there. I also like you've taken things like the Legion Destroyers. I was just looking at the Heavy Destroyer Squad entry. So
Yep.
I know Annihilator has built some Heavy Destroyers himself. Some pretty sexy stuff. People want to go check that out. The idea there being basically, hey, of course you'd have destroyers, and their armor, they get affected by radiation sickness and such because the deadly weaponry they're using. Well, maybe some of them have got even more deadly weaponry, and they're trying to put Terminator armor on, not just for the protective abilities of it against enemy attacks, but perhaps against their own. Is the way I look at that unit.
Yeah.
That these are the poor guys in Chernobyl running around with the fucking Geiger counters are going ballistic as they're trying to throw the graphite back in the reactor core.
Yeah, absolutely, Macca. This is probably one of the more popular ideas is the Destroyer. So the Destroyer company, I've seen that used heaps around the world. See it on Instagram and Facebook posts, and people message me about it. And heavy destroyers are a nice part of that for sure. If you've got destroyers in power armor, why not in Terminator armor? It's exactly like you say. The backstory to the Terminator armor is that it's for use in these really dangerous environments, which are what destroyers create.
Yeah, and it's one of those funny things where, to me, I'm still sitting here going, how come Forge World hasn't done a Destroyer Rite of War yet? Because I've been asking for one for about 5 years now. And
Heaps of people have. Yeah.
and they've finally kind of got one with the Dreadwing Rite of War in Book 9, but it's isolated to that particular legion, and it's not terrible Rite of War, but it's probably not what I would have gone for. It's very much a legion-specific Rite of War.
Yeah, well, I think Dark Angels players play Dark Angels because they like Dark Angels. I don't know that there's going to be too many players that are like, oh, well, now I need to play Dark Angels because I want to play Destroyers.
Wait, people like Dark Angels? I don't. From just looking at the feedback the book has been getting, I don't even think Dark Angels players like Dark Angels. The amount of whinging I've seen.
Well,
Like,
Calibanites and Terrans and the Lions Chosen. There's all sorts of
oh,
hidden conflicts going on in that legion and in their group, I'm sure.
just yeah, they're the new. As I was saying before, they're the new Space Wolf players. But yeah, no, so it's really cool. There's also these bits of interesting fluff that is thrown throughout. So you've obviously got the side panels. There's also actual paragraphs and short stories like the Octarian Auxilia. And then, of course, the Solar Auxilia. You've got this additional stuff that's been put in for the Solar Augs. And I know from playing against some Mournival guys in Act this year, part of the problem with Solar Auxilia is the range is really good when you're playing a 3,000 point Age of Darkness battle. The minute you go down to something like a Centurion, oh boy, does it get hard for the Solar Auxilia because your range is so restricted.
Mm.
And so my take on it is the Mournival events group, you guys have come together to try and expand on the range somewhat in order to make them a bit more viable in those small point games where they're not bringing 16 super heavies to the battle at 3,000 points or something.
Yeah, exactly, Marco. That's right. We've got quite a few people who play Solar Ops. So Stuart McBurney, the guy who did the graphics, Annihilator's little brother, he's been a really keen member of the group, really core member of the Mournival events group, and a really imaginative Solar Auxilia player for a long time. And he's done a heap of great conversions. And we play tested all these rules for all these different units that he invented to fill the gaps that you correctly say do exist when you try and scale the Solar Ox down. Like they're great for 3K. That's the way that I think most of the army units were written in the official publications. But when you do try and come down to Centurion, it can create some gaps in the range, and some really obvious things that were missing, like Solar Auxilia not being able to take Sentinels when walkers are so key to Centurion. Aside from infantry, walkers are the next sort of mainstay of the unit types. And you can perfectly happily play Centurion games with all infantry, and quite frequently here in Sydney we do. But it's also nice to mix it up and have some mobile firepower, which is what the Solar Ox really lack. Excuse me. So Armoured Sentinels were a thing we introduced there, and Stu went back and looked at the rules for like the Hades breaching drill. That's another interesting one. So it's a monstrous creature that creates a sort of transport option, which is something that's a bit different and unusual. So we added those rules in. And then there's the ones of his own creation, like jetpack infantry that have got Volkite charges that jump around, and they can be a bit more of an assaulty type unit, which again is a big sort of hole in the Solar Auxilia range. The Space Marines have got assault squads and the various iterations of those Legion-specific assault squads, but the Solar Auxilia have got their dudes with power axes that are pretty slow moving, really, and pretty static. So there's a bit of a gap there, which Stu filled with his imagination and his modelling skills, and we play tested them, and yeah, excellent units that really add a lot of narrative flavour, because as you say, Mac, back in the intro, he's written a blurb, and he's made up special characters, which we'll talk about a little bit later, custom characters with their own rules that push the narrative of this particular skill sets of these different sub-formations within the Solar Ox.
It's funny, we played a game against one another at ACT. It was our first game of ACT this year, and we were playing on this airstrip, and we were talking about it because how difficult it is for the Solar Auxiliary and Centurion was one of the things we were discussing. And I feel sorry for him because at the midpoint of the battle, essentially on this table was a runway that went straight across the center of the table from one end to the other, and there's an aircraft taking off on this runway, and so each turn it would move a set amount of distance, and if a unit was hit by it, it would absolutely mess up their day, like strength 10 AP1 hits or something, because you're being run down by taking a bloody Storm Eagle or something taken off. And he assaulted one of my units with his Valataris, and I think he killed them. And when he swept past them, he ended up standing up in the middle of the runway with his unit, and he was just like, "Oh shit!" And the plane just come forward and just mowed down his entire Valataris unit. So that was good fun. But that's one of those great things that the narrative approach is being taken in these events, one of the fun things you can do, that Valataris unit, they earned that win in the battle. You know, they won the firefight, except I lured them into the middle of the airstrip and they got run down by a plane. You know, that was fun. Like, we both had a good laugh about that, and, you know,
Yeah, it's good narrative because you're introducing the terrain elements to more fully tell the story of what's happening in the battle space. It's not just 100 dudes fighting 60 dudes. There's other events occurring around them, setting the scene.
exactly. And I think that's something I often come back to is people like to say, oh, you know, you guys are being elitist or something because you're demanding nicely painted miniatures on the table or some shit like that. And it's like, no, if you just want to play the game, you can. You could use grey miniatures, and all your terrain can just be bits of polystyrene on their side or Coke cans. Use Coke cans on the table. That's fine. You can play a game in those circumstances. But to really immerse yourself in the situation, that's the goal I'm striving for. And I think a lot of the community in 30k is where we're going out, we're building beautiful tables and beautiful armies to put on them, and having these interactive rules so that we can better simulate some sort of immersive environment.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, terrain's very important to that.
Yeah, it is, and it's often forgotten. And the thing is, you can make a beautiful table for a lot less money than you think about. If you go out and you buy a game mat, you know, you might spend $100 on the mat, and then pick terrain for that table. That terrain doesn't need to be expensive Games Workshop terrain. There's so much other stuff out there. Dom Santilli does some beautiful work. I love Dom's work in general. And if you go look up his stuff on the Whisperheads on Instagram, you can see what he does, and there's a lot of non-Games Workshop stuff in there. So with these character creation guidelines, obviously it's pretty simple how it works. You've got each box, and every time you advance by 1 point a different characteristic, add a special rule, that kind of thing, then there's a points cost associated with that
Yeah,
for the equipment, for whatever. And of course, there's a max cost. There's a point there where at some level it's becoming prohibitively huge. So you've put in there that little caveat: the maximum cost of a character should not exceed 10% of the army. So in a 2,000 point game, not exceeding 200 points. And I think it's pretty fair to say the reason you stipulate that is because there could be some horrible, monstrous abomination of a character starting to come out once they're reaching that kind of point threshold, and in a smaller game, that's going to have a much more noticeable effect.
yeah, that's exactly right, Marco. I've made up heaps of custom characters, tried out different combos over the time, and I've used some for the durations of campaigns and got some advances. Like it's a good campaign mechanic as well, where you can have players earn advances by their deeds, by winning battles, by just surviving. So that's an EO type tool, certainly. But yeah, beyond beyond a certain point, they do become ridiculously expensive. Because ultimately, you're not going that far beyond the basic stat line. So you can get to, say, 4 wounds for a Legione as a starty, so you can be like a Dark Angel character. But and toughness 5, but you can't get beyond that. So theoretically, you can still get one-shotted by a strength 10 attack. A Dreadnought can just crush you with their Power Claw. You fail your 4+ Iron Halo, and you're gone. And you could stack, 300, 350 points on a character like this. So I think it's in the player's best interest not to go too high. I found normally about 100 and something is good to give some options without being like trying to be flagrantly a powery type character. So a good Centurion type character, probably about 150, and that gives you a chance to have some stat upgrades, some equipment, some Legion equipment, and some special rules to add a bit of flavour.
Yeah, that's a cool way of looking at it. So you've got the actual character creation list for Astartes, you've got them for the legions as well, for legion special rules, for specializations. It's a very comprehensive list. And the way it
But
essentially
as you
works,
say, Maka, it hasn't been updated for Book 9, so we do need to. I've put out an errata that lists the options from Book 9 that add to that, but yeah, Book 8 and 9 really need the extra stuff added in, and we might do that at some stage when we
yep,
publish this particular section.
makes perfect sense. The obviously the boxes that people will be seeing on screen, it's essentially you tick up the box and you're going up to that level. So you could go weapon skill 5, weapon skill 6, weapon skill 7. They're all available options to Legionaries Astartes, but you're going to keep ticking up those boxes, and it's going to keep adding points exponentially the more of those boxes you tick. So pretty easy to use. It's kind of like a Inglarge system of you remember the old Mordheim character
Mm.
progression sheets or Necromunda character progression sheet. It's kind of like that, but taken up
Yeah, that's where I
to
got the idea for the format from.
yeah, taking up to that to level 11. Full on D&D level of characterization available to you. So let's move on from there to the Model Events Battle Manual. So explain what the Battle Manual is for compared to the events rulebook.
Okay, so the events rulebook has a lot of options for army list type stuff. So how you build your forces, the units that you take within them, the options that you take for those units. But it doesn't really explain about how to play a Centurion game. And I've had many questions about this type of stuff. Maybe other members of Mortal Event Group have as well, but I can only speak for my personal messenger bank. So it seems to be a bit of a gap in the body of work that we'd produced. In that we had the how to build your army, but we didn't have the next step, how to play a game. Now I made a Google Drive up and dumped all our campaign documents for all the various different events and campaigns that we'd run, so people could go in there and read that stuff. But again, it still didn't explain maybe the thinking behind it and the whole setup of the thing. So I thought I'd try and codify the process that I'd gone through and that other people in the group had gone through to run the numerous events that we had run. And so it basically became a sort of like how to set up an event and then how to run the battles within that event. But there's still a bit of an area about how like the overall campaign is run by the EO that's not covered, because different groups want to achieve different things. They've got different places to play in. So I didn't want to make it too prescriptive in terms of any of that sort of stuff and use like, here is Istvan 3 campaign that Mournival events ran, because that's very context specific, very specific to a time, very specific to a place, very specific to the forces involved. So I still wanted it to be useful by people, no matter where they set their battles and what forces they wanted to use. So I thought I should codify the Decurian. So the section's called Mournival Missions. So Decurian battles, how to set them up, how to randomly generate if you just want to have one-off games, or the EOs or players could go through and choose their missions, and how to determine the winner or loser of those games. Same for Zone Mortalis, because that's spread over a few different publications, and it also tied nicely back into the rulebook where the Zone Mortalis stratagems were. I find stratagems are a really good thing to have to add some complexity and thinking and some sneaky tricks for players to use to prove their tactical superiority against each other. And then the real core is Centurion, so updated Centurion rules, because now there's been a few more different types of units come out, and the rulebook Centurion listed the older stuff and hadn't really clarified for these newer type units. And by that I'm specifically talking about non-tank vehicles, so like buggies and things like that, which are in the Imperial Army list that Mournival Events is working on at the moment. So yeah, a little bit of update with the Centurion stuff, and City Fight as well. That's from back in the old days, 4th edition, Cities of Death, 3rd edition. And Siege Wars as well. Another thing that a lot of people had talked about not working particularly well, like Psychics, yes, clunky, hard to fix, but fortifications. I've had quite a few players here in Australia and also overseas talk about ways to fix fortifications. So we've played around with fortifications a bit and come up with a slightly updated version of the fortification rules, which is then in the battle manual in the form of Siege Wars, to make fortifications a bit more actually useful and not just death traps. Plus bring in those old things from 6th and 7th edition, which didn't make the transition in the Forge World, official Forge World publications, but people might still have the models for them. So the Fortress of Redemption, the Void Shield Generator, the Landing Pad, and the Plasma Obliterator. And a little bit of a blurb. It's an overview. It's not super thorough at the moment, so this might get padded out in later iterations of the battle manual, but just about narrative gaming. So how it's driven by the terrain, how there's a system called Points of Interest, which the Eye of Horus guys developed, and we refined here in Sydney, and some other things like catastrophic damage, secret quests, and mysterious terrain. So lots of different extra bullshit, as Tim from the Eye of Horus would say, that can be included or excluded as players, event organisers see fit to increase or decrease the complexity or the amount of narrative. For instance, there was an event I ran last year, and it was all about trying to kidnap some navigators. So there was some ships seized, but there weren't enough navigators for the ships, so the traders were trying to get into the navigator stronghold and seize the navigators. So all the points of interest were based around the idea of it being a navigator hold. The NPCs were all navigator type NPCs. The equipment had a sort of navigational and ship type component feel, so searching for bits and pieces to use in the warp vessels, and it just gives an event a nice narrative flavour.
The important thing to point out to people here is that this is all your specific campaign stuff. It's not a for-profit thing like that. It's a supplement that you guys have created with your personal community in mind, but you've tried to open it up as much as you can for other communities, is essentially what you're getting at.
Yeah, exactly right, mate. Well said.
Yeah, it's not trying to horn in on Games Workshop's IP or something like that, because someone's probably mentioned in the comments like, oh, is this like IP, whatever. It's like, no, this is the rules you've come up with for your particular group, and you're just sharing those rules in the open. A lot of the stuff here are your own custom creations as a group to help build up the narrative, and it might not work for every group, which is why you've tried to leave it sort of loose and vague in some areas.
Yeah, well, lots of different people here in Sydney run different events, and they have different interests and themes and whatever. So for me to make it too prescriptive would be just me putting my stamp on this as the editor of the document, and not being fully embracing of all the different ideas and themes that exist, all the potentialities that are out there. So to be useful to more people than just myself, it needs to have some sort of level of generalness. And I know I'm talking about myself here as though I'm the main author, but if you go back to the rule book, and I'm looking through the rule book, the actual stuff that I wrote myself out of the whole book is one, just counting through, two, 3, 4. Out of the first 52 pages, I was the main author of 4 of the pages. Everything else came from other people.
Exactly, and that's part of what I love about it. It's a community book in so many ways. Whether it's Stu, whether it's Josh, yourself, people are contributing to this as members of that gaming community. It's not just the work of one man, and it's great to see, especially because I poked fun at it, but Forge World has professionally paid writers whose whole living essentially is to create Horus Heresy books, and your community is doing it in your spare time. I think it looks just like the quality that comes out of Forge World. That's just crazy to me.
Full credit to Stu for getting the graphics together, and even then we've got like some updated graphics that the community have provided to us. Like people send in stuff like, oh, this is pictures you could use here, there's some nice photos, check out these effects that I've done on this photo, check out this template that we use now, and it's nice. So yeah, it's not just the Mournival, just the core like few dudes that go to the events. It really has become a more global phenomenon thanks to the internet, thanks to Facebook. So it's good. Keep it coming if you're listening and you want to send something in.
So, out of curiosity, your latest updates. Have you done an FAQ for Book 9 yet?
Yeah, there is an FAQ there. Just finished talking about the battle manual. So the battle manual, the main thrust of it is to have that mission part in there. So people that have only ever played out of the black books or just the standard 6 missions, the frontline or Age of Darkness missions, so that they can see how to play Decurian battles, how they can play Centurion battles, how they can play these smaller and more diverse styles of mission. Also, there's the agent section. So the agents that weren't originally included in the rulebook because they were also the same agents as used by the Oz 30k dudes. So we want to just round out all the agents with the original 4 assassins, for instance, and what else we got there? The anti-assassins, so like the Black Pariah, the Hydra Operative, Lodge Master, who's like the traitor version of the Knight Errant, etc., etc., and some more additional units. These are ones that people have either contacted me about with ideas or that exist, but there's no current Horus Heresy rules for them. So people would have to go back and find the 5th edition or 6th edition or 7th edition rules for the Dominus Praetor Armoured Crawler or the Macarius, aka the Lupercal, thanks to the Age of Darkness for coming out. Podcast coming out with the name for that one, the Lupercal Super Heavy, or the 2 types of Marauder Super Heavy Flyer. So the rules for those are in there, just so everything that you need is now in these documents, compiled in these documents, and people don't have to go off and try and find some obscure Imperial Armour book that hasn't been in publication for 10 years.
Which we've all had to do at some point in life, unfortunately.
So yeah, that's the thrust of the battle manual, basically just rounding out the current array of units and agents that we use at Mournival events. Also, there's a little Adeptus Titanicus section at the back of both of the books.
Yep, as well as some other Adeptus Titanicus bonuses you guys have created along the way.
Yeah, we play quite a bit of Titanicus now. Not everyone in the group, like everyone's still 28 mil is their core, but there's a lot of dudes playing Titanicus now, and it's pretty exciting rule system that the people that do play really enjoy. And the missions that come in the original Titanicus book are not great. So these are various iterations on that, various refinements, especially based on the work of Graham Sanders. Shout out to Grazer if he's out there listening. And also more to do with a simple campaign system. There's a lot of different campaign systems in the Titanicus official books. Some of them are a bit complex for beginner type characters. Tried to make a slightly more basic campaign system just to keep the newer players on board, and a little bit of an update to the army list options just to bring the 28 mil versions of the different weapon options onto the quarter scale, so 7 mil table or 32 mil down to 8 mil, depending how you define it. So like some different Carapace weapons and whatnot. And that's basically the book's marker.
Very good. So the last thing I'll get you on today is the Book 9. You've got a very small FAQ you've just quickly released for it.
Yep.
I just want to go through them because obviously Book 9's just come out, and there are people who may be watching who don't know about this, and maybe they can use your FAQ as a guide for their own groups. So, Mastery of the Blades states that a lot of different swords and blades. Does the Mastery of the Blade bonus apply to Force swords, Psi Arcana blades, and swords from Book 8? You guys have answered yes. That's pretty obvious, I think, to everyone. The cannon model with a combi grenade launcher by stasis grenade. You've answered yes to that as well, because that was the original intent of the rule. I think it's pretty safe to say.
Yeah, I think so too. It can be a bit tricky arguing about what the intent is, can't it? So,
well, yeah. Ravenwing Scion allows you to reroll thrust distances, but there is no such thing in an Astartes army list. Should it be charge distances? To which, of course, you've rightfully, I think, answered no, because that is just going to make them ridiculously strong. Also, you've said, may Dark Angels players still use Ravenwing or Ironwing Protocol Rites of War from Book 6? They're now superseded, so you've answered no. Funny that.
Yeah, a bit of debate about that. A lot of Raven, uh, older style Dark Angels players really still want to play their Raven Wing or Iron Wing. Yeah,
I
this is the
mean,
call I made, but it could be wrong.
if they
But
want to
it needs
go
to be
back to
clarified.
that, where do you draw the line? Do you start? Do you say, okay, we can use the old acid heavy bolters as well? So there's also, if Lionel Johnson joins a squad with the Scion special rule, they lose the benefits of this rule as Primarchs don't have the Legionaries Astartes special rule. Was this intended? And you've written to this one as well. No, Lionel Johnson is ignored for the purpose of this rule, so he does not benefit from the rule, but neither does he prevent the squad from benefiting from the rule, which I think is just a bit of common sense.
Yeah, you wouldn't think your Primarch would actively debuff a squad. That was my.
So there's one I want to throw at you now, off the
Yep.
top of my own head.
Right.
So simple yes or no. Causewayne is written as having a weapon called the Blade. We know it's a sword from the artwork of Causewayne and how it's described in the books. However, rules as written, he will not benefit from their Master of the Blade special rule. Do you think Causewayne should?
Well, interesting that you put me on the spot to answer this. My initial feeling would be yes, but I don't just make these things up myself. I go and pass them off to Dark Angels players and wait to see what the Dark Angels players say to me, and I act on their recommendations to me pretty much because they're the players that really are going to be the most affected by it. They're going to be affected by it every time they use one of these things. So I would send that off to some trusted Dark Angels players in the Mournival Events group. I wouldn't ask it on the Dark Angels players Facebook group because that could provoke 194 post thread. And I suspect the answer would be yes to that one.
Yeah, you'll get the response from them. Should the Lion benefit from Mastery of the Blade, even though he doesn't have the Legionaries Astartes Dark Angels special rule?
True.
Yeah. Also, should the Lion's Blade be made of adamantium and piss fire or something? I don't know. Yeah, all right. So that takes us through that. I've given you now something to mull over and take to your community. So where can people find you when they want to talk about Mournival event stuff? Not just with you, but Mournival events in general.
So if you just search Mournival, spelled as per the original Black Book spelling or the novel spelling, so Mournival events. We've got a Facebook page, and on that you can see all the admins. The admins are the core dudes, so feel free to message them or message me. I seem to end up doing a lot of the coordination of the various documentation. So I'm always happy to receive feedback, questions, suggestions, people that aren't sure about things. Don't be afraid to ask a question. There's just about every day someone will put up a question like, where do I find blah, 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 where do I find blah, blah, blah. But the main thing I would say is when you go on to the Mournival Events group, go and look at the pinned posts. There's a link to a Google Drive, and the Google Drive has all the current documents. Some of the documents are too big to actually fit in the files section of the Mournival Events group, so unfortunately they can't be found there on Facebook. But once you've got the link to the Google Drive, you can go in and see all the stuff. And there's quite a bit of resources there. I've tidied it up recently, so it's hopefully not just inundated with lots and lots of different, an overwhelming array of different event organisations or campaign ideas, and you'll be able to get the digital versions of all the documents that we use.
I'll also put a link in the description below the video to the Google Drive so people can go directly from the video to there if they're curious.
Yeah, that'll be really helpful. Thanks, Maka.
And so you yourself, where can people find you?
On Instagram, I'm Heresy Enthusiast. If you want to go and no underscore anything, just Heresy Enthusiast. If you want to go and check out Titanicus, is the main stuff I post there. Or yeah, just message me through Facebook.
There you go. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show today. I know it's you're a busy guy, but I do appreciate the effort to come on here. And
Thanks, Mark. No, it's been good to discuss through this stuff because I'm quite sure that there's a lot of people that I interact with that would benefit from getting this sort of overarching view of the whole system that you've provided today. So thank you.
Yeah, as I said, appreciate you coming on, and look forward to catching up again, sink some beers at another event,
Yeah,
and
that'll be good. Once coronavirus is over, we'll be able to do that.
yeah, it's the never-ending story, isn't it? Really. So yeah, really appreciate having you on, and thanks everyone who's listened through. And I encourage you to check out the Mournival event stuff and play test it out. You might not like everything, but you might like something. And if anything that can make your games better, I think it's a good thing. So thanks to Tom for joining us, and